Sarah Judson. Some folks are waving from the back. Sarah Judson at the Community Foundation, and we are so excited to see so many of you here. And that's because at the Community Foundation, as some of you already know, we connect people through care with causes that matter. And so seeing all of you here tonight and knowing that a cause that matters to you is enhancing our downtown, and not only in Lake Charles, but across Southwest Louisiana. So thank you for your interest in supporting this cause and being a part of this tonight. You know, one of those buzzwords that we hear a lot is public-private partnerships. Tonight is a great example of that. If you look on the screen, hopefully you can see it from your direction a little better than me, but you can see we have partners with the city and the parish with Visit Lake Charles. We have Coca-Cola, who made sure we're not thirsty tonight, the Cajun Cafe, a downtown business who did our refreshments, and this will be taped by the parish for Seago. So not only those of us here tonight, but others will be able to reference this as well. So we really appreciate that. And we also appreciate our partners at L'Auberge for hosting our speaker tonight. And he said it is really nice. Big luxury. We want to remind you all as to how we got here tonight. You see on the screen the Just Imagine logo, and our image there is of strong downtowns. And actually in our master plan, this strong downtown example is Sulphur, and we're glad to be able to highlight that as well. And so the way that got started is right after Hurricane Laura, we were reached out to by David and Angela Philo. David grew up in Moss Bluff and happens to be one of the creators of Yob News. Well, he and his wife decided that they really wanted to support David's hometown region after Hurricane Laura. And so they ultimately contributed $2.5 million to the Community Foundation with the goal of building a more sustainable and thriving Southwest Louisiana. So where we are now is that we had over a year of community engagement. Many of you were a part of that with world-class master planners. That's how the Just Imagine plan was created. And there are 11 what we call catalytic projects in the plan. One of those is strong downtowns. So because our community and together we were starting to implement parts of the Just Imagine plan, and it's such a quality plan, last May, a group of us went to Cincinnati for something called the Congress for the New Urbanism and won an international award for the Just Imagine Southwest Museum Funds. Well, it's a really big deal. We learned that when we were there, even bigger than we understood. And one of the things there is that we got to go to workshops and learn things, and that's how we are here today. So just imagine the big overarching plan, 11 projects in the plan, and then we hone in and work on specifics to begin to implement those things. And so you all being here tonight is crucial, and I'm just so excited to have so many people here because this is how we get to implement a plan when people hear about it. So thank you for being here, and I want you to know too that after Jeff's talk, he will have a little time for Q&A. So Andre and Matt on either side have index cards and pens. So if you have a burning question and you already know it and you want to wave at one of them, they will get you a card that you can have it in your lap. Or you can give them a look as it gets later in the presentation, and they will deliver one to you. So we are excited that you are all here, and I'd now like to ask my friend and our board chair of the Community Foundation, and possibly Just Speck's #1 fan, Jim Rock, to come share a few words.
Thanks, sir. Yeah, I'm Jim Robb, got for Fair Judges. Got the side of Dave of Lake Area Industry Alive for my main job, so prefer. But while we were at the conference last year, it's actually last May, like I said, there's a lot of different speakers on different subjects, and those of you that might have known me for a long time know I used to like to run. So I used to run a lot. I'm older and wiser, or some of me older. and I like to walk a lot now, so I went to one on walkability. I went to it, and several others that were with us were in that session as well. And 1 hour, and it was fast-paced, it was interesting, it was educational, entertaining, and Jeff Speck was just a really great speaker. And I was just really impressed. And I got out of that session, told her why Christy about how excited I was. I've told everybody else how excited I am. And so we go to the awards thing that evening. We're sitting there, all the Lake Charles people kind of sitting together, have karaoke seats in front of me. In box jet, they said right in front of me. I'm telling somebody, that's the guy. That's the guy. So great. And I said, would you like to meet him? I said, well, heck, yeah. Mine said something else, but it's supposed to be heck, yeah. And so I got to introduce myself to Jeff, exchange contact info. I've been in contact with this office for 11 months. So this is a long time coming with their glad to see it finally come to fruition. So I'm so excited. We're in the airport next morning. I'm getting on Amazon. I'm targeted by a book for temporary care. But anyway, get on Amazon to order one of his books. But I get home the next day, I'll talk to my daughter, Courtney, who was here, right? And then tell her about the trip, tell her about Jeff Speck and what I learned. I ordered a book. I showed her on my phone with a picture of books. And she said, I've got one of his books. I said, you got to be kidding me. What are you doing to one of his books? No offense, Jeff. And she used to live and work in downtown in Denver. And so she did a lot of walking there. So she wrote a book about walking. And so I purchased that book. But I said, how strange is that? Me and my daughter, 1,000 miles plus away, but I flip up from the same guy. About that time, my son Garrett calls, and he lives in New York City. He's an architect. And he says, Garrett, you're not going to believe this. Sam at this conference, he heard this guy talk. He was really excited about it. Bought one of his books, and I got one of his books too. It's on walkability. And Garrett said, oh, y'all talking about Jeff Speck. I said, what the heck? I spill about Jeff Speck. What's the deal here? And on one of his architectural projects, he was incorporated some walkability stuff. So he bought one of his books as a reference. And so I told Jack this story yesterday. I told you we have the first official Rock Family Jeff Speck fan club. Headquartered in Lake Charles. What a coincidence. 3 people, New York, Denver, Lake Charles. It looks up. Yeah. So, but anyway, it's really an honor to get to, on me, introduce Jeff, because I tell you, had a great morning together with a few other folks, walking around, showing him what we've got. He's given us a lot of advice on what we can have. He gave us, as you know, he's a walkability expert, but he also considers himself to be a city planner, an urban designer. He's educated in both art and architecture, and author of the century's best-selling book on walkability. Now, no, though in 2025, so we got 75 years left of going century, but I'm pretty sure he got good lead, and I'm confident he's going to wind up on top. So please help welcome Jeff Speck.
Hi, everybody. Hey, Jim, thank you. Hey, thanks to Jim, thanks to Sarah and Lauren and everyone else who toured me around today, and the Community Foundation and everyone that made this happen. Am I about the right volume? A little loud? Perfect. Is it good? People are saying it's good. That was interesting. I don't want to give away my tongue. Hold on. Go on. Hopefully that won't happen again. There we go. Okay. So I was at MUC this morning. Maybe some of you saw the little snippet at noon, which I didn't see yet, but I can't wait to show my mom. And I realized, and I said, no, I've got the best job in America, which is I get to go to cities. I do this about maybe 10 times a year. I go to a city I've often never been to before, first timer this trip. I spend the day walking around. I tell them what's wrong with them, and then I get to leave. And that's my plan today. You got a lot of good things going for you. I can be most helpful by making suggestions about things you can change. So I really see it as my responsibility and my entertainment to share with cities the stuff that I notice which offer opportunity for improvement. So that's what I'll be doing, as well as complimenting you on some of the good things that you're already doing. I have learned to focus on walkability as a window into good plan. So while people think of me in the framework of walking for health and all the different aspects of the walkable lifestyle, in fact, I'm not so interested in that as I am interested in what makes cities great. And I just happened to learn through the years, about 30 years of doing this work, that if you design around walkability, you do make cities great. And so that became the framework for my work, but also I found was the best way to communicate it to audiences. Like audiences, what we did, and you guys in this part of the country have been, urban design adjacent for some time. So many of these terms will seem familiar. But what we did was first called neo-traditional town planning and traditional urban development, which turned off the liberals. Then it was called the new urbanism, which it still is kind of, that turns off the conservatives. You can call it best practices in urban design, but as when you discuss it in terms of walkability, I found that people really get it and they can advocate for it themselves. And it's just a much more accessible way of describing good planning. So let's talk about that. My best known book is called Walkable City, and in Walkable City, I have essentially two conversations. The first is why we need to make our cities more walkable, and the second is how to do it. That first part, you're not getting. And the reason is that, first of all, I won't have time to go through all of that. Secondly, if you made the effort to show up tonight, you're probably already pretty convinced that Lake Charles will be a better place if it's a more walkable place. But also that's available as a TED Talk that you can see in 15 minutes, which is a lot less time than you're committing to me tonight on that topic of why. So we're going to move ahead to specifically how to make the city more walkable and what I call my general theory of walkability. The general theory of walkability asks the question, how in America do we get people to walk? And understanding that most people have cars, that driving is heavily subsidized. Once you own a car, the smart thing to do is to use it all the time. Every mile you drive costs less than the mile before. In fact, 4/5 of the cost of owning a car are fixed costs, and only 1/5 are variable costs. So the smart thing to do is to drive. The car is there in the driveway between you and everything, and it's just natural to fall into the car and use it all the time. So if you're going to get people to walk, the walk has to be as good as drive, or better. And if it's going to be that way, it needs to do four things simultaneously. The walk needs to be useful, it needs to be safe, it needs to be comfortable, and it needs to be interesting. So that's the structure of my Walkable City, is the structure of my talk tonight. So I'll be going through each of these categories one by one. When I'm done, I'll say, look, we did all four. But we're going to start with the useful walk, which is a story I heard from my mentors, Andres Duane and Elizabeth Blair-Zyber, who was around after REDUC when Andres was in town. So he, as you probably, a good number of you, he's been quite active through this area. I was at BUZ for 10 years, but I fell in love with town planning, thinking I was going to be an architect. I fell in love with town planning because I heard Andres talk in 1989. And he gave this talk, I'm going to share some of it with you tonight, but he gave some talk called The Story of Planning, talking about the profession of planning. And he told the story of the 19th century when people were choking on the soot from the dark satanic mills, and the planners said, hey, let's move the housing away from the factories. And they did, and lifespans increased immediately and dramatically, and the planners were hailed as heroes, and we like to say they've been trying to repeat that experience ever since. So the onset of what's called Euclidean zoning, the dividing up of the landscape into large areas of single use, which became the foundation of the whole profession of planning, was about doing this. And basically saying nothing's going to be near anything else. And it made sense in terms of polluting industry, but it didn't make sense in terms of any other factor. And in fact, most industry these days that you find in metropolitan areas doesn't pollute. And so this model, I was an art history major. They say that wasn't the most lucrative choice that I'm in. But I could tell you that you don't want a rock coat when you're planning. You want a Syrah. Syrah was the pointillist. But the more fine grained, the more confetti-like, the more intermixture zoning, then walking actually becomes useful again. So that's the first step, is to have a variety of uses together. So the walk is useful. And that gets to the fundamental new urbanist conversation. What I heard from Andres in 1989 that made me a planner was him describing how there's only two tested ways to design communities. There's 1,000 ways to make a town, but there's only two ways that we've tested by the thousands, and they are the traditional neighborhood and suburban sprawl. And the traditional neighborhood, this is Newburyport, Massachusetts, near where I live. I live in Brookline, Massachusetts. The traditional neighborhood is defined in planning terms as being compact, as being diverse, and as being walkable. It's compact in the sense that you're actually looking at several neighborhoods in your report. Throughout history and across cultures, most neighborhoods are about a 5-minute walk from edge to center, so a half mile across. And you find that consistently because basically, as Andres would say, a half mile is the distance that you feel done driving. If the walk is it all good? Well, I should say, quarter mile. From the edge to the center is a quarter mile across to the half mile. The quarter mile, which is a 5-minute walk, is a very natural walk and an easy walk to take even in the sultry weather. And so that's a measure that you find in most neighborhoods. Secondly, it's diverse. There are places to live in bigger houses and smaller houses. There are places to work, places to worship. The main street is there, places to shop, places to recreate. Most of your daily needs are within walking distance. So that's that fine pointillist grain that we were talking about. And then finally, it's walkable because there's lots of streets and small blocks. And because there's lots of streets that connect, no one street needs to handle that much traffic. And so no one street becomes overwhelmed by traffic and becomes a divider and an unwalkable corridor. Sprawl, in contrast, it's clearly not compact, thus the name. It's not diverse. A whole square mile, and I will one use, like in that blob map that I showed you. And it's not walkable because, look, there's a lot of streets, but most of them are, can you see my laser from the battery? Most of them are loops or cul-de-sacs. So the few streets that do connect, which here are occurring about once per quarter mile, the few streets that do connect actually have to handle all the traffic of the metropolis. And they're designed around that one factor. How many cars can we move? How quickly? We call them traffic sewers. And they're not just like sewers because look, there's not a single address on these streets. They're just collector roads that get you to the address streets. These are all BAPs because they're so noxious. And if you live in this environment, you are 290% as likely to be killed by a car. So the idea, everyone wants their kid to grow up on a cul-de-sac. But once you leave the cul-de-sac, you're exposed to this extremely dangerous circumstance. And so you have this phenomenon of the cul-de-sac kid who just camping the cul-de-sac and is stuck in that homogeneous environment. So it's fun to break sprawl down into its constituent parts, the places where you only live, the places where you only work, where you only shop. Schools keep getting bigger and bigger in the parking lots. Next to the school is getting even bigger yet. When you consolidate schools, as some school systems are doing, that means the school is further away from most people. The size of the parking lot compared to the size of the school tells you all you need to know about that school. And even sports facilities are consolidated. So here, it's great that in Weston, which is where Fort Lauderdale is spilling in the Everglades, you have 8 soccer fields in one place and 8 baseball diamonds and everything else. But actually, the kid that lives in this house has a 1.5-mile drive to get to the sports complex, which is crazy, right? It seems preposterous, but it makes perfect sense when in a model in which everyone is assumed to be driving all the time. And that's the foundation of how sprawl has been organized. So this is the part. Sorry. I'm having some clicker issues. Is the computer there? How close am I to the computer? Okay, I'll just aim that way. When you disassociate everything from everything else and reconnect it only with unknown infrastructure, this is the part that we forgot to count. And this isn't Photoshop, this is Los Angeles. But the fact that no one actually counted the cars and said, how much driving is going to have to happen in this environment? And it's resulted in people spending a lot of their time stopping traffic on these roads. I always tell people it's a two-part deal. For a lot of Americans, actually only 10% of Americans, but they'll tell you they want a house that has nothing else around it but other houses. Right? The majority want to be able to walk to stuff, but 10% want this American dream. And I always say that's fine, that could be your dream, but just that's your nightmare, it comes with it because of the separation. So, the amount that we have to invest so that you never have to wait 2 cycles at a light because the environment is so banal, the experience of being in these places. This is not cover shop. All the dual ashtra in this picture, Florida. It's stressful on families. The longer your commute, the more likely you are to be divorced. That's a bath. And this is a slide I got from an epidemiologist. And this is the guy who wrote, one of the guys who wrote Urban Sprawl and Public Health, a very important book where they say, look, we've got the first, and this was a generation ago. He said, look, we've got the first generation of Americans who are expected to live shorter lives than their parents. Why? Because it's natural to drive to park, to take the escalator to the gym, to get to on the treadmill to walk. And we've engineered out of society the useful walk and the way that we used to get exercise just as a matter of course without having to plan for it. So driving in this environment can be a real drag, and being a pedestrian can be worse. So these are the 2 models. And until now, I was focusing on making new places, right? The entire rest of the talk is going to be about existing places, and particularly about Lake Charles. But for those of you who are all involved in the creation of community, and many of us are, you should kind of shear this image, or these 2 images, into your repus. Because these are the 2 models, and it's important to understand it's the same stuff. Place to live, place to work, place to shop, institutional and school locations. But how big is it? How far apart is it? Right? And importantly, is it a dendritic branching system where the most trips go from the local to the collector to the arterial to the highway and back again? Right? Or is it a network of small blocks? Because that network of small blocks that you see on the right, it was designed around walking. It actually works better for driving. And that's one of the great ironies of sprawl, is that this system on the left that was created around cars is not good for cars. Because if you so much have one engine fire on your collector road, your whole city shuts down for an afternoon. So, and also sprawl doesn't molt. Cities molt. Shacks become buildings, become towers in cities because the grid can handle that. But sprawl really can't. So whenever we make new places, we insist on that network of small block urbanism that you are very fortunate to have already in your downtown. And then I was pleased to see this TND, traditional neighborhood development, happening Walnut Grove, just outside of the heart of the city, that I only have a quick look at it, but it has places to shop and live and places to work. Oops, where was I? That's an office building. I thought I was in the Loire Valley, but it's an office building. So it looks to have different aspects of life all put together in what seems to be a developing nice little street grid. So that's the model that we like to see. So your main walkable opportunity is downtown. Because your downtown is the part of the city that has small blocks, lots of streets, mixed use, right? Because it already has mixed use, in fact, you can bring more stuff into it without upsetting people. And the biggest reason why downtown is the most, in this first category, right, the useful walk category, the reason that downtown has the most opportunity is, just try to bring a 7-Eleven into a suburban neighborhood and see what happens, right? You can't put a 7-Eleven on a cul-de-sac. And people come after you with pitchforks if you try. So the idea of having a useful walk means we look first to downtown or the other main streets that you may have in your region. So looking downtown, my comedic timing is maybe a little bit off because I'm not having a clicker success. What is missing or underrepresented in your downtown core of all the uses, and there's others, but of all the uses that make a place complete, what is missing or underrepresented? Certainly housing is underrepresented in your downtown. And the first thing we do when we work in communities to try to make them more vital is we do everything we can to bring housing into city centers. Jane Jacobs made a comment about Wall Street. Wall Street was a very different place in 1960 when she asked the question, 400,000 people are coming to Wall Street every day. Why does Wall Street not have a single great restaurant or a great gym? And her answer was what she called time spread. That was the term she used. That to have a great restaurant or a great gym, you need an evening crowd as well as a lunchtime crowd. And so when you get that around the pocket, that occupation of your CBDs, your central business districts, which is an American mistake that other countries didn't make, to have a CBD that was just for business and not for anything else, that when you bring the housing into that area, you get the vitality you really want. And she made the point, these highways, as she said to Robert Moses, these highways that you're building in and out of cities, apparently, supposedly to make it easy to get in, are basically just making it easy to get out. And people aren't coming back in to frequent all the establishments that are there. So you have to bring housing into your downtown, and you're doing that. So in my experience, in every city, and many cities that don't look as good as yours, when you bring more housing and apartments with the downtown, they rent up right away. Now, there's sometimes the problems with financing, and there's problems getting it built, and and then you have, I memorized this, Rita, Laura, Delta, the freeze, and the fly. So there are other things that can get in the way, but in fact, downtown housing, because even though your downtown isn't running on every cylinder, there's some great stuff downtown, particularly on that James Eagles Main, couple blocks of Riot Street. There's a lot of people who want to live in that environment, and it's an underserved population. So that great building has come. This even better, very large building we'll be talking about in a bit has arrived. So we just say, more please, we want more of these. And cities are using TIP, tax increment financing, they're using tax abatements and other things, and they understand, and cities understand, when they invest in more housing downtown, it does come back to the city in spades because of the greater property values that lead to greater tax revenues in the future, because not only do you have more land being used, but the commercial stuff starts to really kick in as well when you have more housing downtown. So that's the first category, the useful lot. The second category is where we are going to spend most of our time is the safe walk. And the reason is the safe walk is the aspect of these four categories that the city really controls and can change the fastest. So the useful walk, cities can influence with zoning and with investment. We're going to get to the comfortable and interesting walk, which cities can also do influence with investment and with their codes. But the comfortable and interesting walk and the useful walk are pretty much a function of what's framing the civic spaces, which is principally private. And so cities influence how it happens, but they don't control it completely or they don't enact it. Whereas the streets a city owns, and city could change quickly. And it's been fun to watch my work in cities change over the years from someone who spent a lot more time looking at the bigger picture and now spends almost all his time looking at streets, because the cities that bring me in want change fast. They want change before the next election. Now, you're not going to get change before the next election here because it's in 2 days. But subsequent to that election, whoever's in power is going to want to see change before the next election. And cities realize that they can change their streets quickly, and changing their streets, which they principally own, allows them to change their downtowns. We had a crisis you may have heard about. We have what's called a traffic violence epidemic in the U.S., where our streets are not safe, our downtown streets as well, but all of our streets are not safe as they could be. There's been a 78% increase in the last 15 years in your likelihood of being killed as a pedestrian. So why does this happen? There's a book by Angie Schmidt called Right of Way that talks about this. And she basically finds two causes. It's not cell phones, because they have cell phones in Europe, although I'm sure cell phones and distracted driving are a factor. But the principal factors are what she calls, first of all, the suburbanization of poverty. So what's happening in the U.S. is the cities used to be where all the poor people live and the wealthy people are in the suburbs, but now the poor people want to be in cities The poor people without cars are being driven into the suburban periphery where actually it was never conceived that people would be without cars. So you have folks living in this environment where there are no, A, there's no accommodations for pedestrians, but B, it's extraordinarily dangerous, the number of lanes and the speed of the traffic. You know, out here, I've heard that there are kids walking to school on the 4-foot sidewalk with the rollover curbs adjacent to 13-foot lanes on Nelson Road. You know, that shouldn't be happening. You shouldn't have to walk in this environment. That's been a major factor. A bigger factor has been our fleet bloat. And the simple fact is, 15 years ago, the typical car was a sedan. And now the typical car is a SUV, or out here, a pickup truck with extra wheels. But the way the fleet has changed has been the biggest impact. And I use the word impact intentionally. The difference is not what to go. The difference between being hit by a car and being hit by an SUV, it's dramatic in many different ways. Where you're hit, where you end up after you're hit, how hard it is to slow the vehicle down, the sheer mass of the vehicle. This has been something that we complain about, but that we know we're not going to fix quickly. In fact, the federal government has been encouraging, through various incentives, has encouraged the car dealers. They make a lot more money making SUVs and pickup trucks than they do making sedans. So until that changes, and we hope it changes, but until that changes, we have to look for other ways to make our streets safe, I should say, to make it safe to be in our streets. And the way we can do that is by simply designing our streets so that cars don't speed. And that's something we have not been doing in the US. But looking at speed is super important. A car going 25 miles an hour, I should say a car going 35 miles an hour is about 7 times as likely to kill you as a car going 25 miles an hour. So every mile per hour actually in that range within which people are driving in our cities counts tremendously. And so a lot of us who do this work, we focus our efforts on what are the things we can change in the environment to basically just get people to drive the speed limit. Because it's the speeding above the speed limit that's getting you into the danger zone. The speed limit itself, I'm all for having lower speed limits and citywide speed limits and downtown speed limits, and there's the whole 20 is plenty movement, which I very much support. But in fact, it is not the speed limit that determines people's speed in cities. It's the design of the environment. So we look at the different aspects of the environment and we ask this question. Now, I have to back up a little bit and talk about why we're in the situation we're in. You may be aware of the Vision Zero movement in Europe, in which many European cities have actually achieved, big cities like Helsinki and Oslo have achieved zero pedestrian traffic deaths year after year. That's what Vision Zero is all about. In the US, of course, a typical city has hundreds of traffic deaths a year, the larger cities. And the reason, and actually pedestrian deaths and injuries have been declining in Europe, because the way that Europeans approach traffic safety is they design the streets to discourage drivers from speeding. They eliminate elbow room. They eliminate forgiveness. If you're an American traffic engineer and you have not been to school in the last decade, you have been taught to design forgiveness. American traffic engineering grew out of American highway engineering. Think about how you set your speed when you get on a highway. If you're like me, you look for the speed limit sign and you set your cruise control for 10 miles an hour over the speed limit sign, or something like that. But the speed limit is determining your speed. For that reason, anything you can do that adds forgiveness to the environment is making it safer. Wider lanes, fewer intersections, one-way travel, big shoulders with clear zones, no trees. All these things add forgiveness, and if your speed limit is the constant, then they make the streets safer. But now think about how do you set your speed when you're driving in a neighborhood or in a city. You're looking at all the cues around you. You don't want to be dangerous to others. You don't want to be dangerous to yourself. And so it's the environment that determines your speed. What causes speeding? Forgiveness, elbow room. All those things that make a highway safer make a downtown street more dangerous. And so that's what we look at when we think about the design of the city. The first one is how many lanes are there? This is Salt Lake City, famous for its big blocks and its giant streets. You may be aware of the famous Salt Lake City streets. Lots of lanes. This is my family crossing, part of my family crossing a a street in Salt Lake where they give you flags to wave so you don't get plowed down. I thought that was pretty novel until I discovered, this is another place, but until I discovered Granville Island in Vancouver. They had a new program there called Gravel Brick, BC, Gravel Brick. Across the street, native brick, establish eye contact. Sorry. It's funny, but it'd be funnier to my slides with it. There we go. Gravel bricks, make eye contact. Any case, this is Canada, so they're foam bricks. They're nice people there. They don't hear. So, how many lanes do we have in our streets? This was Oklahoma City. This picture. They were named in Prevention Magazine in its Walkable Cities Finder issue. They were named the worst city for pedestrians in the entire country. And Mayor Kronek called me in and said, "What can we do?" And I said, "Let's do a walkability study." And he said, "What's that?" I said, "I don't know. I've never done one before, but it seems like what you need." And we looked at the car counts. These 15 years ago, we looked at the car counts in the downtown core, knowing that 2 lanes could easily handle 10,000 cars per day. And no engineer will dispute this. A 2-lane street without turn lanes can handle 10,000 cars per day. You add center turn lane, left turn lane, it'll be 18,000 cars per day. But we know 10,000 cars at a 2-lane street. And we looked at these car counts in the downtown, 6,000, 7,000. And these were all streets that were designated to be 4 lanes or more. They were currently 4 to 6 lanes. They were going to stay 4 to 6 lanes. 10,000, 8,000, 5,000, 4,000 cars per day. So we discovered basically a mismatch between the number of lanes, the supply of lanes, and the demand of the lanes. And we said, that's money in the bank. This is asphalt that we can be using for other things. All it's doing is encouraging people to speed. And so, happily, coincidentally, the same day that I submitted my walkability study, Devon Energy committed to building this 51-story tower in the heart of the downtown. And they said, what can we, it was generating $200 million in tax increment, basically a form of tax increment financing, a TIF. And they said, what can we spend that money on? Let's rebuild every downtown street in our 40-block urban core from building face to building face. And they did it over the next 8 years. My job was to design the curb to curb of all these streets. And I was able to eliminate 1/3 of the lanes, which allowed us to double the amount of on-street parking, which the merchants loved. It allowed us to add a bike network and do some other things. And so typical street went from that to that. And here it is under construction. This street, a 4-lane one-way, and we'll talk about how one-ways are not safe compared to 2-ways. This 4-lane one-way became a 2-lane two-way with a tram in it over time. Could someone just do next when I get desperate? So I'm going to be clicking, but I think next might just work better. You may want to share. Next. Could someone? Yes. So this street. Sorry, go back one, please. This street became this street. Next. And I say this is what you do when you have money, right? I'm sorry, but yeah. But now we double. Oh man. Okay, so I tell cities, however, don't rebuild, restructure. Now, there are times that it makes sense to rebuild, and I'm going to show you one. But you can restripe all downtown for the price of rebuilding just a few streets. And so we like to see the money go as far as possible, and so I'm often advising cities to do that. So here are the car counts I have in your downtown core. And you can see Lakeshore Drive is 14,500 cars per day. If you've been paying attention, you know that could be 3 lanes instead of 5. Broad Street is 10,000. That could be 2 lanes without left-hand turn lanes. And by the way, in Oklahoma City, we made a rule. If it doesn't have more than 10,000 cars per day, it does not get left turn lanes. And there were no problems. And we did that. And then Ryan Street has 9,000 cars per day in this section. There are more cars further south. But these are the only three that I received because I believe they're the three highest. So every other street in the downtown core, Pujo, Kirby, and Iris, and Bilbo, Baggins, are all streets that really only need to be two-lane streets. So that's the first thing I want to lead you with. Next, there we go. So let's look at Lakeshore Drive first, because you did what so many cities did. Don't feel bad. Is you basically put a highway between yourself and the water. And it isn't just that it has 5 lanes, it's that it was conceived of as a highway. It wasn't conceived of as an urban street. It's got, the broad median without trees in it. By the way, a median with trees in it feels like a neighborhood. A median without trees feels like a highway. Right? It's got the median with trees in it, it swoops, but it also has twice as many lanes as it actually meets. It also has sections. This is one of the sections that does have a sidewalk, but it also has sections where he has the commerce that doesn't have a sidewalk. Next, please. And so here's the one drawing I did for this talk. Next, please. Very fancy drawing. Theoretically, I don't know the right way to do it. We did a similar experiment in Memphis where we actually closed half of their waterfront drive along the river, Memphis, which led to a rebellion. So you got to be careful. But the fact is that this is all the street that you need. And this whole area without a sidewalk could have a very ample promenade. And it could have a section for bikes and a section for pedestrians, but it's just available. It's also, conceivable that it could become part of the real estate that's adjacent to it if you don't want to use all of it, because you really have an extra, say, 30 feet there. But I just want to lay out that is available to you as an access. Next, please. Go back one, please. Kirby Street is 3 lanes, and it only needs to be 2 lanes. Next, please. And you can see it's a wide 3 lanes. It doesn't feel safe. You see the speed limit on the right. Next, please. That may look familiar. There it is. I have a sign, not a cop. Next, please. Ryan Street is 4 lanes where, it's 2 lanes, and then it becomes 4 lanes. And it does pick up a little more traffic, but it does not need 4 lanes in this location. Next. And that brings up a whole other issue, which is, let's say Ryan Street has more than 10,000 cars per day. Let's say it needs those left turn lanes. It doesn't need to be 4 lane. And one wonderful little tool that planners have been using now for about 25 years is called the classic 4-to-3 American road diet. And what's amazing about the 4-to-3 road diet is that it does not reduce capacity. So this is your typical 4-lane street. You can see that there's lots of opportunities for crashing. It's extremely dangerous, but it's extremely inefficient because the fast lane was also the turn lane. And that makes it super inefficient and causes pulses. So, traffic pulses that cause traffic. So when you remove a lane and create a shared center turn lane, next, there it is, you actually take 6 crash opportunities and turn them into 3 crash opportunities. So no one is surprised when this happens and the number of deaths and injuries drops precipitously. But this is what surprises everyone. This is a chart of 23 different road diets that are all 4 lanes before and 3 lanes after. And this is the daily traffic. I don't know if you can see the right column. I think I have the zoom in. But basically, the 2 columns are the traffic before, the throughput, next please, the throughput before and the throughput after. And essentially, overall, it stays the same. So that's the great lesson, is that it's a win-win-win. You get space in the street for something else, like parking or bike lane. You reduce injuries and death, and you do not reduce the traffic throughput. So any 4-laner that you have is available to become a 3 lane. So Ryan at this location could easily be 3 lanes, which now gives you room for potentially parking, or for bike lanes if this wants to be a bike corridor in this location. It was the first thing we saw when we hit the downtown today. This does not feel safe. So there are others as well. So we did the number of lanes. Next is the width of the lanes themselves. Andres Duani would show this slide and he'd say, the typical street, the typical subdivision in America is now wide enough to allow you to see the curvature of the earth. And it's true. I like the donut, right? The standards have changed. So this is was a subdivision from the 60s. Notice the width of the street. This is a subdivision from the 80s. Same height of airplane, same size of house, but the stand there's just been this mission creep, and our streets have gotten wider and wider. We know that people drive faster on wider lanes. When people see a 12-foot lane, a 13-foot lane, they think highway, and they drive highway speeds. Thank goodness for NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, who have set 10 feet. It used to be the standard. It should remain the standard. 10 feet is a standard. Not in your little residential neighborhoods where actually currently even you have some beautiful, even narrower shared travel paths. But in an urban area with a lot of trips, 10 feet is the standard that we want to see. Here's 10 feet against a 7-foot parking lane. Typically parking lanes are 8 feet, but you can do 7 or 7.5. But you can see that 2 rather large vehicles fit just fine in 10 and 7. But it causes the car to go a little bit slower than it might otherwise go if it was a 11-foot or 12-foot lane. Next, please. And so that's the standard. Next. And now, when I tell cities you can use this standard, they say, oh, but our standard is 11 feet. I say, well, what about Pujo? Because you have you have streets in your city. Pujo has basically 7 to 7.5-foot parking lanes against 2 10-foot lanes. You say, oh, it's one way, but plenty of cities should have 2-way streets with the same measurements. They are a standard measurement. And then much more typically in your downtown, you have 12-foot lanes. Like here, you've got 24 feet for the 2-lane pairs on the Lakeshore Drive, which is why there's so many traffic violations on it. But this is next, please. Then you've got Clarence Street, which you're not allowed to park on. And we found this all over the downtown. So Clarence Street effectively, next please, effectively has 17-foot lanes because the parking lanes are disallowed. And then, can we go back one? And then we have Kirby Street, which I'm going to be emphasizing more. But Kirby Street is about 44 feet across. I think I measured it. It's 44 feet across. So, and it's been restriped as 3 15-foot lanes. And this one deserves special attention because the TDA and others went to Public Works and said, can it please not have 15-foot lanes? Can we have parallel parking on at least one side? Well, in fact, 44 feet could get you 3 lanes and parking on both sides, right? 3 lanes plus parking on both sides. But at least you have parking on one side. And the city staff, as happens in many cities, don't feel that you're unusual. But the city staff said, oh, they said they can't do it. So you have this freshly striped street, which is perhaps your worst street in your city. And this is a speedway. It's going to be a speedway. It's not a safe out. That's the width of the lanes. Next, I want to read up. I mentioned one-way streets. You only have one, Pujo, in your downtown. I just want to tell the story very quickly of Vancouver, Washington, which was the first one to come to our attention because it was written about in W magazine, where they just could not get life to come back to their main street. I like to say they tried all the tricks, all the B's of the A's, the bricks, the berms, the banners, the bandstands, the balloons, and the ballers, and nothing helped their main street. But eventually they convinced the DOT, or convinced the state to make it a 2-way street. And it was written about famously in this article in Governing Magazine by Alan Ehrenholt, where he said, the street had just as much traffic on it as before. There were just as many cars, but now they're going this way instead of one way. And the number of people visiting the shops has doubled. And we've seen this in city after city. In Savannah on Broad Street, it was converted one way. in 1969, 64% of the businesses on the tax rolls disappeared from the tax rolls. Then they converted it back in 1990, and there was an immediate 50% gain in new businesses. This is because of a lot of different factors, but in the downtown like yours, your blocks are not that small. Your blocks are closer to 400 feet. Your blocks are in between, Salt Lake City blocks and Portland, Oregon blocks, which are the smallest rectilinear blocks, or square actually. But that means that when you make Pujo one way, you're actually really limiting the porosity and the flow through your downtown core. So there's every reason why Pujo could go back to two-way, and it would be better for business if it did. Next, Bruce. I think I went backwards. Next. Next. So here's how it looks. It's got those two lanes. They're lined up. They're 10 feet wide. Next. Okay, so the next item is the parallel parking. I call it an essential barrier of steel that protects the curb from moving vehicles. I used to wonder about the efficacy of parallel parking until I did the walkability study for downtown Fort Lauderdale, or actually West Los Olas and Fort Lauderdale. Before my study, this was a curb you were not allowed to park on at rush hour because they wanted, God help us if people stick around for a drink. They want them out of town as fast as possible. So notice you can park on one side of the street and not the other side of the street. I know you can see from here, this is happy hour on the park side of the street. Next. And this is happy hour on the other park side of the street. Because no one wants to die or sit or stand or walk 3 feet from a curb where cars are zipping by. Right? So next, please. So you have a lot of curves that don't allow parking that could allow parking. If you have the right kit of parts, the 10-foot lane, the 7 to 8 foot parking spaces, the room is there. So you just kind of need to do an audit and find them. You have some places where you're not allowed to park, where happy people are parking, because the room is there. But by the way, you get to this in a minute. This probably is disallowed because it's the door zone. You may have noticed in my Oklahoma City slides, we would actually stripe door zone bike lanes 15 years ago, because we had to. We don't do those anymore. So in fact, any solution with the car door radius of the bike lane is not ideal. The other part of this image is the street trees. Street trees are the second factor that add protection to a sidewalk edge, especially important if there's no parking. The evidence, the expectation of engineers used to be the opposite. Trees were FHOs, fixed and hazardous objects. You didn't want them near the street edge. Now the evidence shows that streets that have trees are actually safer for all users than streets that don't have trees because they slow cars down. Next. Sometimes abruptly. But I mean, better to hit a tree than a pedestrian, but the overall statistics say that streets are safer with trees on the edge. And then this is that idea, if you're missing the parked cars, well, that row of trees in perspective really makes a great edge against traffic. Next this is a Dutch artist's interpretation of what a street feels like without the parked cars, without the trees. And we certainly had that experience today walking on the edge of Ryan, where, this wasn't, I'm not in the street, I'm on the sidewalk. I just put my camera out, took a picture, it's not healthy or safe. We did notice some of it, we didn't see many pedestrians walking around today, but the only ones we saw were protected by parked cars on the sidewalk edge. And then, of course, we found some new, that you're probably aware of, some new sidewalks built recently in the downtown that are pretty perfect. And honestly, I'd rather have a 9-foot sidewalk and parked cars than a 16-foot sidewalk without parked cars, because that edge makes it safe. You've got the river birches that are going to grow nice and tall and sheltering. These are young trees, they're new trees, so they're going to become big. And the parked cars are there protecting the sidewalk edge. Next is what I call vocabulary. What is the street communicating in terms of how it's laid out? Does it communicate people place, or does it communicate car place? This is what I call honesty in journalism. It's a description of the city center addition to Las Vegas, where it says, some would say the entrance to the city center is not inviting the pedestrians. Do you think? whatever you have, stream formed geometrics, swoopy or aerodynamic shapes, or a lot of stripes and other things that look like you're on a runway, right? That's when it feels like car place, not pedestrian place. The cars speed up. Next. And one thing that cities added, ostensibly for pedestrian safety, is the slip lane, with the idea that you have this refuge partway across the street. But of course, what it really is an opportunity for drivers to speed around the corner, not have to obey the signal, and creates a very dangerous circumstance for pedestrians. This is Atlanta in Midtown, which has been doing a lot to improve itself. This is the same location. In Boston, too, we're filling in our slip lanes. I only noticed one location of slip lanes in your downtown. You know where it is, on Lakeshore Drive. But this is a perfect cross intersection that was designed as a highway, not as a city street. So that's why you have slip lanes there. Any new plan should get rid of them. And then, vocabulary. Right? What is this? Are we in a city street, or are we in some sort of automotive environment? And here's where I just have to break it down next and say, looking at this street next. Lake Charles, your street design review process is broken. And I have to say that the fact that you've got newly striped 15-foot lanes puts you in much worse position than any Besettas did this year. So I'm sorry. So there's a top-down process that has to occur where this new way of thinking about traffic, I'm sure the engineers working in your city want it to be safe, but this idea that safety comes not from forgiveness, but from actually constraint, is one that hasn't taken hold here yet, and I can tell you with 100% confidence that it needs to. Right? So that's my serious message for you today. Push buttons. Most walkable cities don't have them. States often impose them. Counties or parishes impose them. Next, please. But the one back. The idea that a pedestrian has to wait for the light, has to ask for the light, is kind of a second-class citizen, and doesn't automatically get the cycle. The most walkable cities, New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, do not have them. And so I recommend in the heart of your city, where you want more walkability, that you would get rid of them or make them automatic. Here's a fun little tidbit. When you remove, 2 different studies have shown this over 20 years, and it hasn't filtered into many cities. When you remove the center line from a street, the double yellow stripe, people drive 7 miles an hour slower. Next. There you have it, 7 miles an hour. Next. Was there one in between? Did we miss one? Yeah. So you can't be guaranteed that you stay on the right side of the yellow. But I think it was versus dodging this pedestrian, which makes sense. But the point is that this phenomenon is really telling. It points very directly at the foundational understanding that we need to have that makes streets safe, that's contrary to common sense. But if you think about it, it makes sense that double yellow stripe that would ostensibly keep you safe as a driver actually makes you feel safe as a driver and makes you go 7 miles an hour faster, right? That's the psychology we need to understand when we're designing downtown streets. Cycling, the biggest urban planning revolution currently underway in only some American cities, can be very frustrating for cities because you have to invest in a significant amount of light infrastructure before you change the culture. And it's hard because you spend money on a lane and nothing happens. You spend money on another lane and nothing happens. It's only when you have what's called a comprehensive low-stress network that you generate cycling population. We know the cycling population does not follow temperature or topography or culture as much as it follows investment. And so the question is there an opportunity here? And I think there is because of the extra lanes that we're discovering. Is there opportunity here not to put a bike lane in every street, but to make it pretty easy and safe and comfortable to get to most addresses by bike? And when you do that, the flatness doesn't hurt. When you do that, and I've biked around New Orleans plenty. you can bike quite some distance without sweating on the day when you can't walk a block without sweating, right? So I think that you could really improve your bike culture here. This is for a while, this was the gold standard. The idea that you pull the parked cars off the curb and create that protected bike facility. That's one way you create a low stress network. This is Prospect Park in New York City, here where Jim's son lives. And notice they turned a 3-laner into a 2-laner by pulling the cars off the curb, creating this protected bike lane. Number of cyclists tripled. Next, sidewalk cycling went to almost none. Next, speeding almost went away. Next, injury crashes to all users, particularly drivers, down 63%. And remarkably, this 2-laner handles as many cars as it did as a 3-laner, because people were basically speeding from red light to red light before. This being New York City, of course, there was a drawn-out lawsuit, 6-year lawsuit, but eventually the bike painting NIMBY trolls gradually surrendered to reality. But I show this slide to contrast it with the next slide, next please, which is, as I mentioned, no one wants their daughter in the doors. So we try to avoid striping door zone bike lanes. Next please. And there's opportunities. So here, Dr. Meipel, being DeBakey, does not have enough, as I understand it, does not have enough cars on it to justify 3 lanes. So it could be a 2-lane. And so if you make it 2 lanes, you have room in the street for 2 actually buffered bike lanes. You don't need, there's no door zone because there's no parking. And the street has no parking on it except in one location. So it's 37 feet across. So you can have 17 feet split between the 2 sides. No center line, right? And the bike lane to the buffer on each side. Next is, except for right here, because I know that these 10 parking spaces will kill it. Because they always do. Maybe not, but it's really hard to remove 5 other than 10 parking spaces in the city. What I've noticed is, I think, because Ryan Street, we know can go from 4 lanes, we believe it can go from 4 lanes to 3 and add bike lanes. If the bike facility is going to pick up on Ryan Street, where it should probably continue until it gets to the double parallel parked Main Street part of Ryan Street, where I'd say the parking is more important than the bike lanes, and the bike corridor might shift. And there's multiple paths, and we could look into where else it could go. But for this segment of Ryan Street, all the way to the heart of downtown, there can be a bike lane there. This section of the Baggie, all the way to the end of the Baggie, has room for bike lanes. You can cut over on East Street, avoid all this parked area, and then pick up on Ryan Street here. So I think if you do a bike facility up to Baggie, over East, and up Ryan, I believe. And that's a key corridor for cycling, I would say. And then Ryan Street, of course, has extra width in it to be a 3-laner space as well. All right. I know it looks like I'm only half done. The safe walk was the biggest category. The other 2 are pretty quick, so I'm not that far from the end. We're going to move now to the comfortable walk, which is a little counterintuitive as well. We all love to climb mountains and see broad views, but the evolutionary biologists tell us that all animals, humans among them, we're simultaneously seeking prospect and refuge. You want to see your prey? This is in our bones, thousands of years of evolution. We can't help it. We grew up at the forest edge. We want to be able to see our prey before they attack us, our predators before they attack us, and we want to feel that our flanks are covered from attack. And if our flanks don't feel covered, we do not feel safe. And that's in our bones. So the best places have both prospect and refuge, but certainly the refuge is essential. I like to say a plaza is only as good as its walls. A street is only as good as its edges. We've been talking for some time, this is a very old drawing, about what the ideal height to width ratio is. As far back as the Renaissance, they advocated for 1-to-1 height to width spaces. 3-to-1 can be great. Beyond 1-to-6 or so, you no longer feel enclosed. So you want that sense of enclosure. Next, 6-to-1 in Salzburg, perfectly north of Boston, perfectly delightful. Next, the opposite of Salzburg, of course, is Houston. You may know this part of Houston is much better now. This is Houston in the 80s, but I still showed this slide to remind people that the surface parking lot is the principal violator here of spatial, what we call spatial definition. That sense that your flank's covered. And you have a lot of that right here. Right? You have what could potentially, in which current players understand, could be a nice space in front of the Civic Center, but that it doesn't have good edges. Is someone making espresso? That's interesting. I'll ignore it if you will. So this will never be a space. I say this will never be a place until it's a space, and it'll never be a space until it has edges. So you really want buildings here, buildings there. It's great that the next please. So here's just some images of the tarmac. Next. I think you go back. Yeah, next. Now, next. And so here, actually, in one image, you see the difference between modernist planning up on the right and traditional planning. Down here, the apartment building that I already celebrated holds the edge of the street. Every street that this confronts has a good edge. The modernist idea was the building is an object. It's actually the term is figural object versus figural space. You want the space to have a shape. You don't want the object to have a shape. But here the object has a shape. Next. And in so doing, it pulls back behind this parking. The parking is in front, between you and the street. With or without the missing sidewalk, it doesn't make a good street space. Next. Yes, but sure, here they are side by side. I just made this diagram I'm going to use now in my lectures of figural space versus figural object. Next. And then as early as after Rita, when the new urbanists came to town and did this volunteer charrette, next, idealizing your downtown, what you see in this image is remarkable. It is basically, if you look closely, there's no public space or street that isn't lined by buildings. And this is the principal contribution that the new urbanists make to civic design, is to understand that the first goal to make a successful downtown, once the streets are safe, I would say, is to have no buildings behind parking lots. Next. Sorry, I should have zoomed in already. But see, the parking is always isolated in the middle of the block and never in front of the building. Next. And in your just imagine plan that I was there for the award, congratulations. Next. That's understood, right? It's what you call the perimeter building. The building holds the edge of a block. Next. And then, if you rotate your building, it doesn't really work. Now, don't feel bad because Charlotte did this to all its buildings. They've recovered now. But in the 70s and 80s, the entirety of downtown Charlotte was rotated buildings. Next. But there was discussed this morning that people are considering putting a green park on this empty site. And I would say, this is not a very good edge. This is a bad edge, and this is no edge. So actually, and there's so much green over here, I actually would not suggest it as a green. Because it neither has that spatial containment, really, but also doesn't have things giving it food and drink and activity. It's not well shaped or well activated. So I'm not suggesting this is an ideal location for a green for that reason. I was in Bexley. I was doing this in Bexley, Ohio last week, and they have this great CVS that holds the edge of the curb, which is what you get through CVS or Walgreens or whomever if you insist. And don't allow them to do what they always want to do, which is to put the parking in front of the building. A month ago, I was in Port Chester, New York, where they didn't do that. And you're walking along the main street, and you just want to turn around because of this little bit of parking in front of the building. But all it takes is a little bit of parking to wreck that street edge, right? And here you are in Ryan. This is one of the best spatially defined moments in downtown. And then you turn around, next, and this is what you see. And so this is where you go from pedestrians wanting to keep walking to pedestrians wanting to stop walking. Next. And this parking lot here, right, is all of these parking lots to connect Ryan into the downtown. These are your highest priority sites. Next. And it's really important that whatever comes, if you can see the red line I draw, it's really important that whatever comes just holds that edge. with at least 2 stories of building also, so you get that height that is some good proportion of the width. So as you move forward, now your codes require this. You have, I was delighted to learn, you guys are quite sophisticated on your planning side, and you've adopted what's called the SMART code, which is the first mass available form-based code. I actually worked on it many years ago at TPC. It's shareware. It's available to any city that wants to make the effort to customize it to themselves and adopt it, and you guys did that. You got to make sure that you enforce it, and that when folks come in and ask for a variance because they want parking in front, you say, well, actually, we want to have a successful downtown, so we're going to enforce the code that requires that edge. And then the plan that you probably know about for the amphitheater that's coming to that important corner, it begins to do the job of holding the edge of the streets, and in fact, does the really smart thing of creating the circle's gone, right? We're in here, and it creates a much better shaped space. Notice it's straight as Broad Street, so the big swooping curve goes away, which is great, makes it more urban, connects it to the water. It shapes the edge of Broad Street, which is currently missing. This new conference center, right? Between the conference center and the amphitheater building, there's going to be a really nice space. And then it makes a nice visible space in front of the event center. It does not, however, hold the edges yet. And I'm sure whoever drew this really wanted to put buildings on either side of this triangular space. And probably that's the second phase. But if I'd had a little more time, I would have done a drawing that just showed how do you want to hold the edge of Lakeshore Drive. You want to hold the edge of the green. When these edges are held, as in your post-RETA plan, then you'll have a more walkable Lakeshore Drive. Next. Back one. So trees are the other part of the comfortable law. You're really missing trees in your downtown. And I don't know if that's historical, inherited, or if the highway engineers got rid of them in the 60s or whatever happened, but you have many fewer trees. In a climate that grows trees really well, you have many fewer trees than you could have. These are much more expensive than restriping streets. So the basic rule is, in the same way that your code requires new buildings to pull up to the sidewalk, when someone builds a new sidewalk, is that sidewalk required to have trees? And is the sidewalk required to have structural soil underneath it? Underneath both the tree bed and the sidewalk, so there's adequate root volume so the trees can really grow? Because trees do so much. Next. And, go back. Someone said this to me. Our engineers have a lot of negative thoughts when it comes to street trees. And I'm happy sharing it with you because all engineers in all cities only understand trees from a maintenance perspective. And they're a pain in the neck. Trees, make sidewalks buckle. There's a lot of cleaning. Trees are a real pain. But trees are the most undervalued asset in almost every American city. If you look at all the things that they do. And you're all just go next. But I had to actually, you can keep going. I had to actually define all this for a tree plan I did. And I'll tell you when to stop. Keep going. One more. Okay. So the city of Cedar Rapids, Iowa lost 70% of its trees in 1 hour in a horrible derecho straight windstorm in 2020. And I was put in charge of the RELEAF, RELEAF Cedar Rapids. If you're all interested in trees, you can look it up and find the whole plan, RELEAF Cedar Rapids. There's documentation in that plan which proves all of these things, many of which you already know, but some of which are counterintuitive. Trees clean our water and reduce flooding. Trees clean our air. Trees sustain wildlife and the food web. Trees fight climate change. Trees improve our health. They eliminate or heat islands. They reduce car crashes. They reduce crime. They create community. They cut energy costs. They increase property values, and they help businesses. Some of these, like trees reduce crime, seem kind of surprising. These are actual longitudinal studies in the same place that show that when trees arrive, crime goes down. When trees leave, crime goes up. Trees are vastly undervalued, and all I can say is it's worth every dollar you spend on them, presuming you give them proper soil law. Palm trees, however, are not really trees. They're a lovely decoration. You should stop using palm trees. Next, please. And then that's the comfortable walk. Finally, well, then with the interesting walk, next, next and next. So we talked about 1-to-1 being the Renaissance ideal height to width ratio of next. This is a 1-to-1 street. This is in Grand Rapids, where it's actually a quite walkable downtown in Grand Rapids. But no one wants to walk on this street, which connects the two best hotels, because when one side of the street is an exposed parking deck, and the other side is a conference facility, apparently it's signed an aberration of the parking deck. It's a joke. It's boring. You want to hide the parking, and you want buildings that show signs of life. You want windows and doors and signs of human habitation. We humans are among the social primates. Nothing interests us more than other humans. We need those signs of humanity. Next, please. Joe Riley, who was mayor of Charleston for 40 years, taught us it only takes 20 feet of building to hide 200 feet of parking, and this has become a standard. Next, please, that we use. This is one from my old neighborhood in South Beach. I call it the Chia Pet Garage. They reserved the mid-century modern storefronts and the garage that up behind. Next. Next. Every city has these. You know, your parking deck was built at a time when you did not know better. Next. Now you do. Now you know that. And this model will be called the Dallas Donut, although there's different versions of it. It was invented in Texas. And you can see that the parking, you know, this isn't really a street. It's an alley. The parking lot is embedded in the block. It's hidden by this thin layer of buildings. That's the right way to do it. That's the way that your code should insist that people do it. Next. And then I just want to share kind of a humorous conversation about how far we've come and how far we have to go, which is that I discovered not just this lovely building, but we were walking around the neighborhood next, and we came to this spot, and I started by saying, this is incredible. This is what you do when you don't have the density or the money to do a structure. So you're going to park the middle of the block. So the middle of the block is essentially a surface lot rather than a structure lot. Great. And then the buildings face the street. And we're like, what's going on here? Next. And so, you know, this is a perfectly wonderful condition. These are great looking houses. People sit out next, but they're sitting on the parking lot. And what's amazing about this project next is that it's the perfect site plan. And it's the beautiful, I think these are great little houses. So the pieces are absolutely correct. Next. But it's backwards. And these people don't have an address. I'm in front of Park and Shaw 16B. And, right? Rather than having an address on the street, like these wonderful houses that were built across the streets a little bit prior. So that's one side of the street next. And, you know, this is the other side of the street. It's excuse me while I show you my butt. But that's the next. And so this weird condition next, and they, at the corner where this building has no back against the parking lot, I finally had to put a door on the street. But I don't think your code allows this. So this was probably a variance that was granted at the last minute because you wanted to see it built. But you can't let these things happen because it's so close. You know, you're on the 10-yard line, but you're not getting in the end zone with projects like these. So just to know, you've got all the right pieces. But I guess this is my advocacy saying that you need to really ask people to follow the code, so that you end up with better outcomes. Next. Like this building, which really does almost everything right, including hiding the parking next, and the developer proud enough to even put his daughter's names on the facade. This is the kind of care that people give to cities that deserve it, and I think their city does deserve it. Next. And that's the entire list. However, I want to end with one wonderful example. Next. I said don't rebuild, restripe. Sometimes it makes sense to rebuild. Next. This is Lancaster, California. This is not my project. It's my friends at Bowling Pullizoides, also New Urbanists. This was a 5-lane main street. It was dead and dangerous. Next. And they did this. And next. And they spent $11.2 million. Next. When they spent $11.2 million to turn their street into a linear plaza, which you can park in, but which also becomes a farmer's market and other things on weekends, injury crashes went down 49%, pedestrian crashes went down 78%, pedestrian activity doubled, 57 new businesses opened, 800 new housing units were built, 2,000 new jobs arrived, and estimated economic impact of $282 million. So there are opportunities where it makes sense to make that investment. Next. Keep going, we can go past it. Well, just to show, next, they actually decided to, actually don't worry about it. And go back. I also want to say, I see some wheelchair users in the audience, and I want to make it clear that anything you can do to make the city more walkable property will make it more rollable. But more importantly, anything you can do to make the city more rollable will make it more walkable. And you're a tremendous example of the stroller rule, right? Which is that ADA came, the American Disabilities Act, in order to help people in wheelchairs, but it mostly helps parents with strollers. Universal design works best for everyone. So cities don't pay me to tell you to enforce your ADA laws. It's the law. But that's an important part of the work that we do. So thank you for coming and representing. So I always like to end with some resources. Next. The books, of course, next. If you are just getting started, or you have, more importantly, know someone who just wants to get started, Walkable City really is the gateway drug for discussing these issues. But, next, if you are doing the work, this is the book I would recommend instead. It's not as much fun, but it's 101 two-page pairs, 101 rules for making cities more walkable. I always say each one is just 2 pages, so I say just leave it by the toilet. And just check us whenever you're having a seat. Next. There's the TED Talk I told you about. Next. But there's also a TED Talk that's a 15-minute version of tonight. There's a 15-minute version of how to do it. Next. And those are both on TED.com. All these resources are available on our website, speckmc.com. Next. SpeckMC is our firm name. And finally, it's not too late. In fact, it's just the right timing. I teach a 2-day class at Harvard every summer that anyone is welcome to enroll in. It's May 22nd to 23rd. It's 2 days of this. It includes site visits, it includes a studio exercise. Architects attend, but civilians attend. But it's not. There's no prerequisites or anything. You have to get up to Harvard. It's expensive because it's Harvard. But when you leave, you get a piece of paper that they look like you graduated from Harvard. It's a school, but next. And that's it. That's my talk. So thank you so much.
If anybody has questions, or do get back.
I run over, but I'm happy to take questions. We have on cards, and you can still fill out cards if you still have questions.
Are you the sinners?
I think you may have touched on some, there might be a few more. What are some of the primary barriers for implementing walkability solutions other than people?
Andres Ugani used to say, there's a reason we do 20-year plans, because if someone's in the way of your plan, in 20 years they'll be dead. Which is pretty funny. I'm glad that you've removed people from the competition, because now I can not say anything controversial. The principal impediment which you do not face is, I believe, you control your streets. I don't believe there's an important street in your downtown that you don't control. In other words, that's a parish street or a state road. Most cities that I work in are severely limited by state or county ownership of rights of way. So that's good news for you. The other issues are principally economic. That's one reason why we focus on the city that voted first. It's because the other three is really what's lining the street. That's principally private stuff, and that goes in cycles. But I do feel that many cities are realizing that it's worth investment. People's hard-earned tax dollars, worth that investment in the short term to generate a larger tax base in the long run.
So to make those things happen, one of the questions is, how else do we generate community interest and buy-in to make things happen?
Well, you keep these forums happening, and not just me, right? There was a wonderful series in Pensacola, Florida, called CivicCon, Civic Conversation, and for 7 years, they've been having monthly events on all the issues surrounding their downtown. Maybe Pensacola is a little bigger than you are, but they're not a huge city. So I do think having these events is important. Additionally, the people who are in this room, you can also show up at city council. You can also show up at planning commission. I don't know what these entities are called in your town. A really interesting thing has happened in my experience in the last 5 years, which is that used to be whenever a developer was coming forward with a good plan, like a whole bunch of housing in the downtown, two types of people would show up. The NIMBYs, who didn't want change, and the YIBBYs, who were friends of, not YIBBYs, the FOD, the friends of the developer, who either were supporting their friend or had some vested interest in the completion of the project. So you had these people, both of whom have vested interest, one in their own property and their own experience, and the other in benefiting their friend and themselves. In the last 5-6 years, a third group has been showing up at many city council meetings I go to. And they tend to be younger, they tend to be tattooed, they often have bike helmets, but they are pro-housing, pro-equity, pro-multimodal transport, and pro-urban. And they don't have a vested interest, they just want to see their city grow in a way that makes it more for everybody. And that's quite a powerful thing to see. I mentioned some of you are those people, but I don't see any bike helmets, that's fine. But the same folks who are here tonight could start showing up at whatever public hearings might occur, and I'm sure there aren't that many of them, which are surrounding people's attempts either to invest in the community in a way that will make it more walkable, or perhaps trying to get a variance away from the rules that already make your community walkable. That's the time to show up.
What low-cost or temporary interventions could Lake Charles use to quickly connect developed blocks that are separated by a vacant block?
Oh, that's a great question. Here's what we talk about tactical urbanism. You guys heard that term? Tactical urbanism is this idea of, I think Jim can, maybe Jim remembers better than I do, but one of the communities that won a New Urbanist Award, when you guys won your award, maybe you remember, had just taken like a parking lot and turned it into a town plaza. And they'd invested in temporary paint and stages and activities, but that sort of stuff can make a difference. Vacant storefronts, I don't know if you have that many vacant storefronts. Communities have created art galleries where you step 6 feet back from the window and you do a whole community-wide search, even a jury curating artwork display. Lots of tricks like that, but honestly, the real prize there is to encourage development of those blocks quickly.
And I'll do a few more, and then we'll wrap up. This question is about lighting. How does that fit in?
So lighting is a sensitive issue because often people overlight. In the name of safety, they overlight public spaces, and then you get this scorched earth solution where people don't want to be there. And the thing that makes places safe is people being there, not just the lighting. It's having the activity. Certainly having adequate lighting so that there aren't pitch black blocks is really important. The main advice that we have as urban designers is that more, and this adds to cost, more smaller lights, more smaller human scale lights are a much more accommodating environment than fewer larger lights, which communicate more of an audible environment.
How does having reliable public transit running past the 4 o'clock late afternoon affect the city's walkability?
So I omitted my transit segment because I just didn't have that much time. And you're one of the smaller cities that I work in, but I like to say that while you have a perfectly walkable neighborhood without transit, you really can't have a walkable city without transit. Because if you don't connect the different walkable parts to each other, then people who have a choice will buy a car and start driving a car everywhere. For transit to be useful, it really needs to have frequent headways. If you have to look at a schedule, it's a different kind of transit. Truly useful transit has such frequent headways that you don't have to look at a schedule. And that's really hard. In a smaller city, that's really hard to pull off. I'm not saying you can or should do it immediately, but that's the goal. The other thing I'll mention is that a lot of cities that have hub and spoke transit systems, which focus on access that reach as many addresses as possible, a lot of the cities are changing their systems to more simple network systems, where you're actually more often you need to make a transfer. But there's many more frequent buses. Or I should say, it's the same number of drivers and same number of buses, but by creating a logical grid that requires transfers, people actually get to more destinations more quickly. But there's kind of a revolution going underway. There's a wonderful book called Trucks. What's Jarrett Walker's book called? Who are the nerds in the room? So
We might have to share that reason with later.
So if you look at Jarrett Walker, I knew it would come to me. Human Transit, which sounds dangerous, but it's called Human Transit by Jarrett Walker, which is the book that taught me more than anything about transit. But Jarrett Walker's firm is one of several that are redesigning city bus networks to be much more efficient by changing them from hub and spoke with a focus on access to simple grids with a focus on frequency. So that's the big picture.
And what types of trees matter and what do you think would work well for us?
Man, so I could go on forever about that. What I learned doing the Cedar Rapids plan, I used to be kind of ambivalent about native versus non-native until I read a book called Nature's Last Boat by Doug Tallamy, which is a pretty popular book, in which he explained that actually non-native trees do not feed anything. Like native critters, insects and birds, they don't change their diet. I mean, it takes thousands of generations for an insect or a bird to change its diet. So they actually can't eat non-native plants. And then you want us to see in the food web, which is apparently undergoing the 6th great extinction right now, only planting native trees will do that. So we now own the tree codes, which non-native trees are contingent but not allowed if a native tree will work. Secondly, a tree that grows to a large size, like a red oak, has about 10 times the canopy of a little tree like a pear. And it's the same cost, essentially, to plant an oak as it is a pear. And so you should always plant a larger tree where it will fit. I don't mean plant it older. I mean just plant a larger species, because then you'll get 10 times the ecosystem benefits than you would if you planted a smaller tree. Finally, and you've hit one of my hobbies. People misunderstand the diversity rule. Mr. Santhamore at the National Arboretum came up with the 10, 20, 30 diversity rule. No more than 10% of your city tree list should be one tree, 20% one genus, and 30% one family. I've got that right. He says everyone's misinterpreted this rule and created this, these are my words, was tutti frutti potpourri, where every street is this complete melange of every possible tree, so that the streets aren't at all different from each other. And if you go on Google, a beautiful tree-lined street, you're going to see 100 pictures of streets lined by one species. And what Santhamore said is, urban diversity is achieved by local homogeneity. So you have streets that are different from each other, but are inherently internally consistent. And that allows you to make places that are different from each other. It allows you to make beautiful streets, and it allows you to get the urban diversity while also, maintaining the sense of urbanism. So that's the other thing I would stress.
Okay, and our last one, really, how we make it happen. How can city planning departments integrate walkability requirements into zoning and permitting for new developments like apartment complexes?
So I think yours already has. And I think your planning department, from what I've heard from Lauren and others, pretty much has the tools in place. There's a few things I mentioned tonight where we could kick the tires and make sure they're there, make sure that there's a no front parking lot rule, make sure there's a street tree at every new sidewalk rule with proper root volume, all those things. But I think that the issue is less in the best practices awareness of your department than it is in the power that department has.
We're so good.
Food for thought and opportunity for us to continue to enhance things here and in our other towns around Southwest Louisiana. And if you are so excited that you're ready to read the book, like Jim Rock and his whole family, we have a local bookstore, The Charmed Page, that has books over here. And Jeff will be here for a little while to sign them if you want to get one tonight. And we also encourage you, if you don't already, to follow and engage with the Community Foundation, with our social media, as well as our newsletter, and then also with the Just Imagine page. And thank you to Visit Lake Charles, who partnered with us in marketing everything related to Just Imagine. So those are both places where we will continue to keep this conversation going and give you opportunities to stay involved. So we look forward to working with all of you to implement some of these things and make our city more walkable. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.